Hi, you're listening to Thoughtful Wellness Revolution, where we believe wellness isn't wellness if it's just for you. We're your hosts, Zahra and Hien. And before we get started, please make sure to give us a 5-star rating and review. Even though we're a podcast that believes in decolonizing, we're still bound to the algorithm. So every little bit that you can help us out, we really appreciate it. And we thank you for all the support. Let's get into it. Hey friends, today we're talking to Jamika Scott, a writer and filmmaker from Tacoma, Washington. So Jamika, what's on your mind today?
How cold it is outside. I'm glad it's not pouring down rain, but that's kind of what's on my mind today is just the changing from that like mild fall weather, which I guess we didn't get a ton of, but to this really cold, frosty weather. And the fact that I'm going to California this week and hopefully it's warmer.
Nice. I'm happy for you and also a little bit jealous because yes, it's like it's not winter yet, but it basically is winter weather already here. So I too am freezing my butt off. And so I guess I'll share a little bit with how I met you, Jamika. So we're both like Tacoma based, and I met you at Jesse Vega, who's our friend's writing workshop. And this was like pre-COVID. Like, do you remember like how wild that was? Like, it feels like so long ago.
Yeah.
But our friend invited us over, or she did a writer's retreat workshop, and she had us over at her home, and she it was just like a space and time to work on our projects. And then she fed us a wonderful meal. And then we kind of also like sat around and kind of shared what we were working on. And that's how I met you. And then since then, I just kind of follow you on social media, and I'm always really amazed at all the things that you do. And I just think you're really cool. And so again, thank you for taking time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing and your filmmaking, and also who is it for?
Yeah, so I have always been a writer, even before I kind of considered myself that. Like I was a kid who was very interested in words and pens and notebooks and reading books. And so I've always just kind of been into words. I've also kind of been a bit of a fabulist in my youth when I would tell a lot of stories. Some people call them lies, but it was just my creativity. But yeah, so it started pretty early, and I've kept a journal for a pretty long time. And when I was younger, my journal was less about like and more about like there was some processing. It was kind of a diary vibe, but I would also use it to write short stories in and things like that. And so that's kind of where that started. And it's always been the part of like my education that's come easiest to me, in the sense that like I understand writing, but then also because I enjoyed it, it made it a little easier than like math and science and all the other things that we had to learn in school. But it wasn't until college that I got into, I ended up majoring in creative writing. I initially went to school for elementary education, but decided to get a creative writing degree because I am not a morning person, and I certainly should not be teaching small children in the morning hours. And so, yeah, so I was in college where I took a screenwriting class, and I had a really cool professor who was kind of a goofball, kind of just a bit weird and quirky. He actually is one of the writers of the film. What am I thinking? Now I can't even remember. Now I'm blanking on it. He'd be really sad about it. But I wanted to say Freaks and Geeks, but it's not Freaks and Geeks. It's Revenge of the Nerds. I was like, it's another movie. It's something about nerds and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, he just kind of has like a silly goofball personality, but he was also really passionate about filmmaking and storytelling and screenwriting. And so that's kind of where my passion for screenwriting really took off. I've always been interested in like film and television, but never really saw myself as a writer or as somebody who could be involved in that world. I didn't necessarily see myself represented, so it didn't feel like something that was accessible to me. And then, yeah, and so from there, it's just kind of become this like a little bit of an obsession of like writing a screenplay and or multiple screenplays. And the issue was like finding people to make those screenplays into movies. And so after I graduated college, that was kind of eventually what ended up happening is I was like, well, I need some way for, to build a portfolio that's more than just scripts. So I kind of ended up getting behind the camera. It's not my favorite place to be necessarily holding the camera, but it served its purpose. And luckily, technology has made things so much easier with like cell phones and ways to kind of put your content out and things like that. So yeah, and aside, I would say that I make my, filmmaking, I do my writing for kind of the underdog, I guess. Like those are the stories I'm interested in, the people who aren't often seen, the people who aren't heard from, the people who have been discounted or just kind of not given that space to tell their story in the way that they want to tell it. And then I'm also really interested in just like human connections and dialogue and how we talk to each other and how we interact. So I think that, people who are kind of looking to go beyond the surface level of, because don't get me wrong, like I love a lightweight rom-com or something silly that's just, something for you to take in. But I'm really interested in making content for the people who, aren't good with small talk, who want to dive deep into the deep conversations about our darkest desires and dreams and wishes and hopes and all that. So.
Oh yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think it's so interesting that you started off, you said going to school for like elementary education, and you said because you're not a morning person, like, oh, I feel you on that. Like, and I just, for a short time, I like pre-COVID, I was a yoga teacher at SAMI, one of the magnet high schools and in Tacoma. And it was really difficult for me as a teacher who was teaching first period to like come on time and like actually have to like be awake and be present. So I feel you on that. But I think I feel like I'm somebody who wants to hear more stories from the underdog and like the deeper stuff. And I like you, I love lightweight rom-coms or just like comedies. But I'm always interested as well in hearing just like from folks that I don't normally hear from, or stories that I wouldn't normally see. And so I think it's really cool that that is who your work is for. And could you tell us a little bit about, what inspires you, or maybe it's probably more than one thing, but I guess as of late, like whatever projects you might be working on right now, like what is it that you're finding is inspiring you?
Again, I think it's just more of like connections between people. I've been and just like the way like communities work, and a lot of what I do, and I think it's the same probably for a lot of writers or artists in general, like definitely the work that I do is reflective of what is happening in my life at the time. And so like I've been working on a screenplay that's kind of all about family and family drama and how things kind of go off the rails when, a matriarch or patriarch of the family passes away. And so, that's been kind of intriguing to me lately. I've spent a lot of time looking into like the probate process. Like we just finished doing probate with my grandma's estate. She passed away last year, and like and it's been just a very weird process, and and it's not a lot. It's, I've learned a lot. And I've been going through it with my mom. And so I tend to go with her. My mom has a hearing issue. And so I'll go with her to places, make sure that she's not missing anything and make sure people aren't having to repeat themselves multiple times, just to kind of make sure the process goes smoothly. And so, and part of that, I think, is my mom being like, well, you know, you might as well learn about this now because, you know, at some point, you know, the inevitable will happen. And so it's been a very interesting process. And so I think that just kind of like family dynamics has been a really big motivator for the stuff that I've been writing, and a big inspiration. And then as well as like local politics, I had started working on a project like actually years ago now that seemed really big, and I've always felt like I needed like essentially like a writer's room to kind of get it done. But I always come back to it. I always add things that like, you know, have happened and would make an interesting storyline, and so on. And so that's, you know, I kind of had put it away for a little while, but lately there have been some stuff happening in Tacoma with local officials, with city ordinances and various things that have inspired me to pick that project back up again.
Wow. Sorry. I love, because what I'm hearing you describe too, you're saying family dynamics, but it's like relational dynamics you seem very astutely aware of. And I think that was something I noticed when I didn't get to watch a lot of your work, but I did watch one of your videos. I am going to get the name wrong, but I think it's called I Am Woman.
It depends on, I'm not, yeah, I was like, I'm not sure. I'm naming things, so I often forget what I've named stuff. If you want to tell me the content, I can maybe confirm, but
it was about like matriarchal power and like women in society and their roles.
That's probably my project called Matriarch, actually.
Thank you. Yeah. I was like, it's something about women. But matriarch, yeah. And I thought that was really beautiful, because I think that's what really came across for me in that was there's like a lot of awareness of the relational dynamic within community and what the matriarch does. And I really appreciated just now hearing you tell the story about your grandmother and matriarchs and like what that really means. And it, as someone who lost my dad a few years ago, losing someone in the family, losing a head of the family is such a dynamic shift. And it really does put everyone into these different roles. And I think it's really beautiful that you're someone who both sees it and is able to document it in a way that is like artistic and lovely. Yeah. But I do want to also add, you talked about politics a little bit, and you seem, as Hien has told me, and from what I have learned so far, involved in your community, and you ran for mayor, I believe, in 2021. How has being an artist impacted your activism and your politics?
Honestly, my activism, my politics, I feel like are an extension of my artistry and my creative way of like seeing the world. And I mean, I would say that like me running for mayor was more, I would say that it was closer to direct action or a stage performance than it was about me being a politician. And that's not to say that I don't like see the importance of that role. And it's not that I was like doing it to make light of it. But one, like going into that race when I did, you know, I gave myself essentially a couple of months between the day I filed and when the primary election was happening. And, you know, my whole goal in that, like I had to ask myself, like, if something happens and things go, you know, well for me, I guess, in a sense, like, and I end up being elected, am I willing to do the job? Because I didn't want to ever step into some role just to like make a statement if I wasn't willing to do the work. And I also don't want to, you know, if I'm not, I publicly critique these people. And so on one hand, I had to like, not to say that if you're not willing to do the job that you can't critique elected officials and so on. But the way in which that, you know, the critique of running for office, like, in a sense, I'm saying like, I can do this better than you. And if I'm saying I can do it better than them, then I have to be willing to try. And so that was kind of the first part of like trying to figure out whether I was willing to do it. But at the end of the day, you know, what qualified as a win for me was not about like getting the most votes and being elected. It was about, you know, if I can insert myself into this space where people are so used to being comfortable and placating and saying the thing that they need to say to make the donors happy. If I can get into this place and kind of shake that up and make people have to say what they actually think and make people have to take a stand and not sit on the fence on something, I think my presence in it was to kind of push people to have to ask questions that they would have been able to easily avoid by me not being there, or by somebody who didn't represent a similar part of, societal thinking and, theology and so on, people who are more in line with the traditional way of doing politics, I would say. I'm not that type of person. I wasn't that type of candidate. And I actually had a couple of issues with, initially I had hired a consulting agency, and I was very clear with them when I was kind of courting agencies about this is what I am looking for. And I don't want to, I'm not a typical candidate. I actually don't really even want to be a candidate. And so, and my goal in life is, the top of the ladder that I'm climbing is not a city council seat in Tacoma. And I love Tacoma. So that's no shade on Tacoma, but it's, that's just not the ladder I'm climbing. And so, I was I need you to know that the tactics you use and the placating you do and the fence sitting that you do, I'm not going to do that, because I'm actually the way I see it, a lot of that happens because people are more interested in keeping that position of power and comfort than they are actually going in there and doing the work. And so, I would love it if I got into office and in 4 years, people are yeah, you need to go, because you're disrupting too much. I don't want to go in there and be one of the things that bugs me now is we'll be watching our city council meetings and there's, a really contentious thing on the agenda, an ordinance that's going to be passed, the housing, the ban that they've put out now for the homeless folks. And so about where they can be and what area of the town you can be in and so on that. There are a lot of people who supposedly on city council didn't agree with that. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to the vote, they all vote for it and they all vote unanimously for it. But my thing, and I had a conversation once with a person who's on council, and I was just what was why did this go down the way it did? Well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you make a statement that spoke to the people who don't feel represented by this? And it was well, we talked about it in, XY meeting and study session and blah, blah, blah. And it was just clear that it was going to pass. Okay, well, if it was going to pass with the majority of vote, then what was the harm in being the one dissenting vote? What was the harm in going on the record and saying, not all of us agree with this, even if this is, and because I think it's we have this, when we don't have that on record, it's so easy for people who want to maintain this status quo to say, well, this is what we've always done. And, this is, and if nobody's this didn't work, then the idea looks in the record book that it did work. And so, I think it's, especially lately, I've been on a few boards and commissions, and I've had to kind of learn, I think people think that dissenting is this inherently confrontational and adversarial type of thing, and it's not. And it might produce a bit of discomfort, but that's that we just have to deal with it because that's life. So I don't know if I answered the question you're asking. I kind of went on a tangent there. I'm a bit of a tangential speaker, but yeah.
No, first of all, we love that. We love that here. Trust me on that. And second of all, I so appreciate not just how involved you are, but just how much conviction and heart you have and just what you were just talking about. You say you're going on a tangent, but I'm just hearing you light up, and I'm thinking oh, I want to learn more. I want to know more, because I think so you're talking about Tacoma, but also you're talking about a lot of different places in the US. And I feel our listeners, as we have listeners all around the country, could probably relate to maybe the frustrations they see in their own towns, in their own cities. And so, yeah, I think, what I think is interesting, because I'm trying to remember, 2021 feels so long ago. It's really not that long ago, but it feels so long. I'm thinking what I really appreciated about your campaign when you were running is it felt like you had so much heart. Like it just felt like you were bringing in so much heart into like the community and into like Tacoma and like, because there's a lot of heart and passion in Tacoma. It's called Grit City, the Grit City for a reason. But I feel like the way they do, just the business as usual politics, the way people want to stay in power, as you mentioned, like it just seems very like the values don't match with like how the people are and the communities are, and like how our politicians and officials are supposedly representing us, I'm doing air quotes, and how they kind of like they fail us, they fail the people, and it's so frustrating, and it hurts to see. And yeah, I'm wondering if you could say more about how what you had said about dissent, not necessarily being confrontational, because I myself feel like, well, even if it is confrontational, I think like conflict is necessary if we want to move forward and progress.
Yeah. So I guess I will say, like, I guess it's confrontational. I guess how I should have phrased it is rather, it's like you said, it's not a bad thing that it's confrontational. I think that there are, because of our city's history with political and like official corruption, that's why we have the certain type of government we had. We had people who were abusing their power on the council. And so now we have what we call a weak mayor form of city council, which means that we have a council and it has a mayor, but really the person who holds the most power in a lot of these changing of rules and laws and so on is the city manager. And they, we kind of, a lot of these things that are put in place were put in place after like a whole lot of corruption that essentially led up to a few different things, but it kind of culminated in when David Brame killed himself and his wife, who was the police chief at the time. And so, and like, even after that was triggered, like when that happened, it triggered some investigations into the police department, and it found that there was quite a broken culture of policing there. That hasn't changed. They didn't do anything about that information. All the people, like the person who rose to power after that was trained under all of those officers who were kind of deemed toxic and terrible. And then that person was our last police chief, Donald Ramsdell, and he was our longest serving police chief, and he came to power after all of this corruption. And so that like, because he touched that that corruption was happening, that he was a part of it, but he was trained by all of those people. The values that they had were the values that they instilled in the department. And then going forward, like seeing what has happened, like the things that have happened in the city while Donald Ramsdell was our police chief, and then the things that have happened. And, he just recently retired, like during the pandemic, like shortly after. They say it didn't have anything to do with what went down with Manny Ellis, but like, I don't know, you can't tell me differently, because I think it was a way for him to kind of take the heat off of himself, because, when you're the police chief, that's, and that's kind of like, how I saw the mayor's office is like, I get that the mayor is quote unquote a weak mayor, but the power in that position is the bully pulpit. You get to have this platform where you can talk to not only your colleagues, but the city, and you can help set the tone for, how the community views justice and how the community views accountability and togetherness. And you can kind of help shift the way people see things, or you can offer that platform to other people so that other perspectives can be shared. Because I think at the root of a lot of this is like, it's not that people are denying that there's a problem. I think that we all agree that there is some sort of problem. The exact root cause of that problem and how to fix that problem is where we differ. And it's okay to have different plans, because there are different, there are different ways. There are as many different ways to solve a problem as there are people. And but the issue is that what I feel we keep getting stuck with are people who continually see, because our city council members are part-time employees, because they don't have a lot of the power that other city council members, like city councils, have, so on, like that, like it's sets them up to not be able to do the work for us that we need them to do. Like if you're being told that this is a part-time job, so you're getting paid part-time hours, you have bills to pay, you have a family to feed, you have a roof to need over your head. And so you're probably gonna, and it's a temporary job. So people are constantly like, well, I have my actual job, and then I have city council, which I do. And so there are shifts that need to happen that make it so that our city council can actually work for the community. They can actually be in the community, that it is their job to do those things. And so I think like what really initially, like what got me into running and what kind of propelled me through it was this idea that things can be different, things can be better. And that it's okay to try something else and have that thing not work out, because it's better than continually doing the thing that doesn't work anymore for anyone. So, yeah.
Absolutely. With that, I absolutely agree with that. And, I hope that not only you run again, but I hope more people like you also run to disrupt the system. Because I consider myself a disruptor in my field of wellness and yoga and stuff. And so any disruption in any field that needs it, I'm all for. And thank you so much for explaining more about the city council, because I knew about the power that the city manager had, which I've always thought that was really messed up and just kind of weird. I did not know about the city council positions being part-time, but that does kind of explain, if it's just a part-time position, how that might impact their attitudes about their role.
I think just the mayor is the only like full-time role on the council.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, this makes me feel like I just want to say to our listeners to like check in with how their own city council and their in their cities work, because I feel like the things that happen in Tacoma, it's not only in Tacoma. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. We always end with asking our guests, this started out as a wellness podcast, but this word doesn't have to be wellness. We always ask, what's one thing you want to see more of in wellness, and what's one thing you want to see less of in wellness? And I'm thinking more along the lines of asking you as an artist, as a community member, activist, organizer. What's one thing you want to see more of and less of?
I would love to see more like collaborative spaces, like collaborative in the sense of the word, that there are various artists of various mediums and backgrounds coming together and working on both individual and collective projects, but also collaborative in the sense that like the space itself is about art and creativity and storytelling, but it's collaborative in the sense that, the funding, the support, the infrastructure for that program, whatever it looks like, is not just coming from, the arts world, which is already terribly underfunded. And most of us are starving artists and don't have a lot of money to fund our own dreams, let alone a collaborative one. But so I would love to see that. And the thing that I would love to see less of is like pilot programs and one-time like funding pots. I think that like people, anytime we have these moments where it feels like the community is just off kilter and things are chaotic and confusing and tense, there seems to be this pattern where a lot of stuff starts to kind of break down, the adults are kind of, they're either too busy with work or they're too busy with their problems or whatever. And so then our youth kind of get left to their own devices. And then something really terrible happens. Some youth commits a horrible crime or something. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, the kids, or something bad happens to a kid. And I one of those things that happened recently was there was a young girl on the hilltop who was killed, Ayana. And, and a lot of people wanted to come together and like, we need to stop this. We need to do this. And like, I think there was some other, there've been lots of gun violence. A lot of the people who have either been the culprits or the victims have been younger folks. And so we start to see this because people don't have anything to do. And especially with COVID, kids weren't in school and they didn't really have a whole lot of guidance. And a lot of people were trying to work to make ends meet and couldn't necessarily be there to give their kids the emotional and educational support that they needed. But we end up having these kids who are kind of like looking for something to do, and they get together, and because they're young and impulsive, something, it's not always something bad, but, oftentimes something bad and sometimes something deadly comes out of it. And then we pour money into these like after school funds and these enrichment programs and things like that. And then after a little while, everybody's really happy about it and the kids are all good and everybody's like, kids are all right. And then they stop funding those, and then the cycle happens all over again. And it's the same with it's like, as soon as things start going well, people are like, okay, well, it's going well, so we don't need to keep putting money in that pot. But it's like a mentally ill person or physically ill person. You take your medicine, the symptoms are alleviated, you start to get better, you build up stronger. And, some people recognize that the medicine that I'm taking is what's doing this and allowing me to live this life that I want. Some people are like, oh, well, the medicine works, so I'm going to stop taking it. And then they fall back into the spiral. And sometimes that spiral's even worse. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with our systems, is that, we have these whack-a-mole tendencies to kind of pick and choose what we want to focus on. And then, then the other things that we neglected get really bad. So we put money in it, then we stop putting money in it, and then it all happens all over again. And so that's, these pilot programs of like, let's give artists a one-time unrestricted funds, or let's, give people $500 a month to see how it impacts their life. And, just these things that the answers for are like right there. So I would love to see a lot less of these like empty gestures and yeah, pilot programs, whatever field it's in. I'm tired of seeing it. There's enough research out there that we can just start investing in the things that we know are going to help.
Yes, to that. And I've always felt that way when I hear about these pilot plans. I'm just like, wait, but I feel like we know that this would work. Like, why don't we just sustain it and just make it part of our lives and system and like watch it improve everybody's lives and the community? So thank you for naming that, because yes, I'm tired of that in every field as well. Zahra, is there anything you wanted to add?
I absolutely love how beautifully you spoke on all of this and just articulated like the differences. And like, I didn't know the term that we've just been using, these pilot programs, which I think was like really helpful. And I think it's really interesting that Tacoma's city council is kind of run like Reddit moderators, is how that felt to me. Where it's like, oh, you have a full-time job, manage this community and get nothing out of it.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm learning a lot today. I really appreciate it. I thank you so much for being on. I'm inspired by your art and your work and your knowledge. It's great. Thank you. And do you have a way of for the people to get in touch with you? We can already get in touch with you, I guess.
Yeah. I am on social media as Oh Damn Jam. And sometimes there's an underscore like before the jam. I think on TikTok, it's just all one thing. On Instagram and Twitter, it's odam_jam. I just got back on Tumblr. I made one post. I think it's the same. I think it's the same on there too. I think it's odam_jam on there as well. But yeah, so I'm around. And then if you still have your voters pamphlet, my phone number is in there, so you can call me if you want to. I accidentally put my cell phone number in the voters pamphlet. Luckily I didn't get a lot of prank calls. It was all good. But yeah, so I feel like I'm around. I like to wander around the hilltop and take photos or parks. And so, if you're ever looking for a photo buddy or art buddy, I love to, wax poetic with people. So yeah, you can find me. I'm around. I have a website, jamikascott.com.
Thank you so much, Jamika, for being on here and talking to us today. And I do just want to say your TikToks are so funny. Like, I just remember like last year when you were, I think it was while you were campaigning, you were also posting like really funny TikToks. And so I just want to like shout out that. And so thank you so much again.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So this is our post interview with Jamika, and Zahra and I were just gushing about how much we admire and love Jamika. And then Zahra was like, you know what, we should just start recording. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, like, totally amazed by everything Jamika said, her work, everything that she brought to the table and shared with us. I wish I remembered what we were just talking about, but I have ADHD. Why did I ask you? Yeah, I want to know why. I said, let's record this.
So basically, I was talking. Wow, now that you made me record,
I'm going back and looking at the transcript.
I'm forgetting, but I think it was something about
direct action.
Yeah. Sorry. So Jamika talked about running for mayor in 2021 in Tacoma. And I was saying that it was interesting how she said she saw that as like a direct action and sort of a performance, because I mean, shit needs to be disrupted, and I thought that was so interesting because I haven't really thought about politics in that way, or at least with like electoral politics. Like I feel, and before you told me to record, now I'm remembering, because before you told me to record, I was going to say that like, I usually see electoral politics and just like power and wanting to change power as very like, almost like binary. Like you either are going to be the, professional, air quotes, professional candidate who is like the typical candidate, or at least something about you is so that most people like will take you seriously and want you to win, and you win. Like you're meaning basically you're in it to win it, or you're not going to win and you didn't make a good impact. It's just like you're in it to win it, or you're not. And we don't look at any of your contribution as anything valuable because you didn't win. So I guess in my mind, because, the politics that I consume or political news I consume, it tends to be very binary of like, will so-and-so be able to win or not? And what does this mean for this team or this team, right? And so I don't know. I thought that was really interesting in thinking about what she said.
Yes, and I totally agree with that, because I too had never thought about the power that comes from running for office, in the sense that Jamika mentioned this in the episode, where it's like, yeah, I can be the person who, because I'm there, tougher questions that they might be able to avoid will get asked because I'm willing to answer them. And I think honestly, this episode and Jamika are an inspiration for like a way we can all get involved in direct action. And not saying like everyone should run for office so they all have to answer all of our questions, but it's like, we have so many moderate Democrats who have no one running unopposed to them, or who don't have to answer hard questions about like healthcare, about public education, about gun control. And I mean, they surface level answer these questions. But if you have someone who is willing to, from the margin, speak up and say, hey, I actually have a big dissent to this conversation, or I have something to add to this conversation, that is going to drive it from that moderate middle ground of like, well, we want everyone to have everything so we can all get elected or whatever. I do think that's what we need more of, it really does. And as performance, like, I'm not looking to win. I'm not looking for an outcome. Like you said, it's not the binary. It's how are we moving the conversation forward? And I think who maybe it was even Joe Biden who said like voting is like getting on a bus, you know, you're like trying to get you to the closest destination, but they don't change bus stops based on, you know, like they change bus stops based on how many people go to them, how like popular that city is, right? So it's like, cool, well, we're trying to get Arizona, anywhere in Arizona is a bad idea for a place named Tacoma, Washington. We're trying to get to Tacoma, Washington from Orlando, you know, and it's like, okay, well, we have a stop in, fuck, I'm so bad at American geography for cities. I don't know, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, right? But it's like, nobody goes to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. If we could, you know, maybe more people go to Nashville if we can get people talking about, I don't know, this metaphor is a bit lost in translation, but I do think it is fascinating to see how we as people are able to move the needle forward or in a different direction based on our decision to engage in direct action within our local communities. So yeah, I talk too much, Hien. How do you feel about that?
Well, I agree with you on that. I think I guess like what I just really appreciate about Jamika is how much like heart she has. Like I feel like she is such like a Tacoman in the way of like there's just so much heart and grit. Like, and I think I had mentioned, you know, like Tacoma is Grit City. And I just really appreciate that she puts that forward, and in like everything that I've seen her do and what I know about her, I feel like she puts that forward, and I just really appreciate that. And I definitely think when it comes to politics, local or not, right? Because she very much talked about local politics, which I think can be so interesting and very easily overlooked, but can be so interesting and so important. I just think there needs to be more of that. But also, Zahra, you and I are heart types, and so of course I'm going to say that. You know, I'm hoping that you know, for folks who are not Enneagram heart types, that they could also feel what we're saying. But I guess what I mean when I say puts a lot of heart is that there's just so much of like her values coming through in what she does and what she says. And I just really appreciate that about her. And I just feel like we would be in a better place if we had elected officials who were like that, who had heart and their values aligned.
Absolutely. But I also think that is a call to all of us to embody a bit of what Jamika does with her work and her life, which is live in your values, like get integrated into your community and get connected to people. Because I think that, yes, we need that in politics, but I think we let it slide in politics because we let it slide in our everyday lives, right? Where it's like, am I in integrity? Am I living in by my values when I'm like, I don't know, speeding and cutting people off in traffic? No, I don't do that very often, which is I'm trying to find a thing that feels like morally neutral and like, you know, but like if you're cutting people off in traffic, like what are your values? If your value is to like be number one everywhere all the time, fine, I guess you're living in your values. And I think that's a whole different issue that we need to, you know, but most of us aren't. As we continue to watch capitalism eat us alive, a lot of us are really questioning our values and like, what if these values, and we continue to deconstruct and decolonize white supremacy culture, you know, we start to wonder like, what are our values and what has been instilled in us? Because like that drive to be the best, that drive to be number one, that drive to speed in traffic and cut everyone off, right? Like, is that your value or is that what's instilled in you? Because I think if you start to live in your values, it's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to notice when other people are living their values, and it's a lot harder to make choices where you're living outside of those values, you know? And it's not, again, I feel like I've been talking about this in our post interviews a little while now because it's a thing I'm thinking about quite regularly in my life, about like living in our values and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I do think I was really impressed with the way Jamika just lives in her values and is able to incorporate all the different facets of her life and herself. Like, I love how at the end she was like, I'm not political, like I'm not a politician.
Yeah, that's in the bonus episode, so be sure to subscribe and listen to that.
Yeah, we got to get our shameless plugs in there. And because truly, I just can never remember what the distinction is between our bonus episode and our non-bonus episodes. But yeah, she talks about, I'm not a politician, I'm an artist, I'm a this, I'm a human, I'm a person, and like, yeah, I love that. I don't know. God, like you said during the episode, I don't know, maybe it's in the bonus episode. I don't fucking know everyone. I love you all, but I can't remember. But you were talking about how, you were talking about how this is a hard week and how you want to, and this like interview inspired you. And I do feel that way as well. Like, I feel like I was just like meh about this week, but now I'm like, yeah, we live in our values, we incorporate art, we care about politics, we care about our community, which is maybe too much gusto for 5:30 p.m. on a Monday, but here we are.
I don't think there can ever be too much gusto, at least when you're a fire sign, okay? Like, I've said it before, but this podcast is run by 2 fire sign women, and I love that about us. And I never want to, like, I don't know, dampen our gusto or our flame whenever we have flames, right? So I'm all for it. Yeah, I definitely feel much more better about that's I mean, that's like an understatement. I just feel a lot better about life in this week after talking to Jamika. But also, like, that is often what happens here, where we might come into the interview feeling whatever way we feel. And before we even got started, Zahra, we were both sharing how exhausted we've been feeling. And yet it's always amazing. We start talking to our guests and we feel, we feel their hearts, and we feel their passion and conviction on the topics they talk about. And then that rubs off on us. And I hope that rubs off onto our listeners as well, because I feel like so much of what Jamika shared, I just appreciate, because it makes me think about my own, like, the roles that I play in my community, and maybe other roles I've yet to take that I want to take. And I just like really appreciate that. And so another thing that she said that's really sticking to me is how she said that her activism in politics is like an extension of herself as like an artist. And I'm thinking, like, I do a lot of things that I don't call art, but I do believe at my core I am an artist. But it feels so cringe to say that as a four. I'm sorry. Like, I just like, even saying that, I feel like, oh God, I don't want to come off as pretentious. So Zahra, I'm just gonna give it back to you.
I was gonna say I agree with that, in the sense that I also feel cringy calling myself like an artist or a writer, but I do spend a lot of time doing artistic and or writing things. But I also wanted to add, I was trying to look for this during the interview, which I shouldn't have been because I get easily distracted, but it's because it's from a meme we posted on our page. And it's a quote, and it says, all poets, all writers are political. They either maintain the status quo or they say, something's wrong, let's change it for the better, by Sonia Sanchez. And we found that via the NAP ministry, because we like to give credit where credit is due. But that's very much how I felt about what Jamika was saying. It's like, art is intended to push boundaries. Art is political. You know what I mean? Like, you can say it's not all you want, but like, then it's just like kitsch, which is like bullshit art, or that's a whole other conversation I don't want to get into on the philosophy of art. But like, art is meant to move us forward, and inherently, so I know it in philosophy as the hermeneutic circle. I know there's another name for it in the art world, but it's the same concept. And it's the idea that like a piece of art isn't static. It's like, from the artist, everything they've ever experienced goes into that art. And from the person looking at the art, everything they've experienced, they see the art through that lens. And then that person talks about the art through that lens. So it's like, it always gets shifted, right? So it's like, it is always inherently pushing us forward because it is showing you from a lens of someone else. You're seeing it through your lens, like someone else is passing it through their lens. Like that's how art moves. Like it's a spiral versus like a circle. And yeah, I don't know. I do love the connectedness of art and its ability to be inherently political while also just like bringing joy and beauty to our lives, you know? But yeah, I agree. I don't know. I think we're lucky.
I think so too. And you know, as you were explaining what you just said, it just makes me think, well, if art is like, it definitely, the experiences of the artist gets passed into the art, and then we as, I don't know, the viewers of the art we see it from our own experiences. I just kind of feel like then we are all kind of pushing each other forward then, like, not to get to like, I don't know, corny humanity based, but I mean that's actually how I am, and really what I think is that then in that case we are all pushing each other forward, especially if we are talking about art in a more expanded way, as we've been talking about wellness in a more expanded way. Then we are all pushing each other forward with the things that we create, whether it's art or just other creative things, because I think we're all creating something. And that's just something I'm sitting with right now, is how we are then really, we're all pushing each other forward, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there can be, as we like to say on this wellness podcast a lot, rabbit holes people fall down in which maybe are not pushing us forward, and there's art that's not inherently pushing us. I mean, it's pushing people forward, but
maybe not where we want to go.
Yeah, I think
right.
That's why
there's pushing us forward towards where we want to go, towards love, towards justice, towards beauty, towards our values, and then maybe there's things that are pushing us towards where we don't want to go,
like Mars.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to kind of end this conversation on, is we're all pushing each other forward, except for some of us who are pushing people down rabbit holes or into, I don't know, Amazon towns, things that are not going to be good for our future. But most of us, like the people listening to this podcast, we're moving forward. We're pushing each other forward, and we're sitting with that, and we're reflecting on our values and how we live in them. Absolutely. And we're just trying to get through this week, every single week.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Like, I can't even add to that, because that's just too fucking real. Every week, right? I just gotta get through this week. Then becomes I just gotta get through this month, which becomes I just gotta get through this year. And I've been feeling that way since 2020, so that's cool. But yeah, thank you everybody for listening and enjoying our little conversation that went all over the place, because it's definitely not scripted.
We like it.
And we like it. We like it. We're all over the place. And we like it, and we love you. And take care, everybody.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Thoughtful Wellness Revolution podcast. For bonus content, you can go to thoughtfulwellnessrevolution.substack.com and subscribe for $5 a month. You can also follow us on Instagram at Thoughtful Wellness Revolution to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you're listening.